Let's pray. Father, we are always asking you to help us glorify you, Father, and give you the thanks that you deserve for all that you've given to us. We ask you, Father, that as we look upon the world that we live in, you would help us to see clearly the things you are doing from day to day. We ask you, Father, to draw our hearts nearer to you. And Father, in doing that, we ask you to help us to look outside of ourselves and outside of the circle that we sometimes draw for ourselves, and see something more of the choices that you have called us to. We ask you to be with us this morning, Father, and challenge us through your word, Father, to follow you with more resolution and more gratitude. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. We're going to talk this morning a little bit about this. And by the way, I'm not talking about the end of the world. Because when we find this word used in 1 John, John is not talking about the end of the world. He's talking about something that we encounter every single day. What he called the spirit of Antichrist. Because there are things that exist. There are things that are a part of the world that we live in that are the very antithesis of the gospel. The antithesis of the mind of Christ. Every time we see them, they remind us that there are things present in our lives, in our world, every day that are not merely suggesting that Jesus Christ is not a good choice. They are saying, first of all, he is not a good choice, and secondly, they are saying that if you behave this way, and this is the disturbing part, if you behave this way, the spirit you are displaying is the spirit of Antichrist. In other words, there are some things that say to the world, there are some things that are evil all the time. There are some things that are bad all the time. There are some things that when we see them, when we hear them, they are telling us that something is occurring that never, ever displays the spirit of the gospel, the spirit of Christ. And we need to pay attention to that. We need to think about what it means, because the other thing that we see in the world we live in are choices. Now somebody's going to say, no, there's only one choice. Well, that's not what we believe. We're going to be going to Evansville on Tuesday. And somebody's going to say, well, there's only one way to go. Actually, there are 5. I looked it up on the map today. There are. Now, it may depend on how fast you want to go. It may depend on whether you want to go the scenic route. It's going to depend on one of those things, but there is more than one way to go. I remember the first time I walked into the supermarket and looked at the cereal aisle, because when I grew up, there were about 5 choices. Now, when you look down the cereal aisle at Walmart, it's immobilizing. You can't even, actually, if you don't pay attention, you can get the wrong kind of shredded wheat. It may be the right brand, but it will still be the wrong kind. It'll be a different size, it'll have sugar on it or something like that. Sometimes choice is a good thing. But sometimes choice is immobilizing. And sometimes choice is deceptive. Because just because it's a choice doesn't mean it's good. And sometimes it's a choice because someone wants you to make a bad one. When Jesus is talking to his disciples in the crowds in Luke chapter 6, there's a little piece of a verse I want us to look at. Chapter 6, verse 46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things I say? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock, and when the flood came, the river crashed against that house and couldn't shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who builds a house on the ground without a foundation, and the river crashed against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the destruction of that house was catastrophic. See, the story is not about a house that fell down and could be rebuilt. It was about a house that failed at the very point of disaster. And when it was done, there was no other place to go. That's choice. Someone made a really bad decision. And that bad decision left them in a place where things were going not only to get bad, but probably worse. Because this gospel, this word, what we're reading about in this text says, okay, obedience is black and white. There's right way, there's wrong. Period. Well, we live in a society that's full of choices, and maybe this is a good way, maybe this is a bad way. There's one good way and one bad way. There is only ever one good way, and there's only ever one bad way. And if you make the choice to go one of those two ways, you're going to experience one of those two outcomes. Because this text, first of all, is speaking to us. You say, well, first of all, I've already made that one good decision. Well, let's talk about that. Because this metric is about one Lord. Not about two or three or something like that. There's one. And so when these guys are hearing it for the first time, it's a very direct question. Now, sometimes when Jesus is speaking to people, he's working on a kind of persuasion. I want you to think about this. This is not persuasion. This is Jesus Christ saying something to these men that he wanted them to remember in the most distinct way. There is one choice, he says. Not two or three, but only one. Why do you call me Lord and don't do the things I say? Now, it's really easy for us to say, well, now, y'all people out there need to pay attention to this. Y'all is not the people we're talking to this morning. Y'all is us. So I want you to narrow your focus just a little bit, because this is what I do when I come to a text like this. It's like this. I put my name in the text. Virgil, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things? Well, I don't really want to think about that. He doesn't give me the option when I come to the text. I have to ask myself, is there something in my life that I don't do? Is there something in the life that I trivialize because I don't think it really matters? Everything in my life matters. Everything in our lives matters. Because there is one way to do them that glorifies him. There's one way to do things that he has laid out for us, and the outcomes are very simple. There's destruction and there's blessing. Well, no, there's destruction and there's blessing. That's the text that's in front of us this morning. In the Old Testament, there's a story. And it's in Genesis chapter 19. And we know the story. There's a squabble between Abraham and Lot at some point because everything is too big. And so Abraham, in the way that is characteristic of him, tells Lot, okay, this is not going to work, so I want you to choose which way to go. And if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Period. I always think that's amazing because Abraham was in charge. He could have said, Lot, go that way. Instead, he gives them the choice. And Lot saw that area down there called Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was green and it was growing. It was a lot nicer. It wasn't going to be quite the effort it was to live in the desert. And so that's the way. So later, the story is that Lot is living there and things are bad. And so these two guys show up and they say, okay, Lot, it's time to choose. Can't read that story and understand it any other way. They placed before him a choice. Now, you know the story because he places it before his sons-in-law and says, if you stay here, you will die. Okay, if I do this, I will die. That's an easy choice for me. I don't want to die. But they didn't really see it that way because to them, things were really good. There were even people in Lot's household that said, well, I don't really get it. I don't know why we have to do this. I'm thinking that maybe that was the discussion between Lot and his wife. But nevertheless, she went with it. And we don't have a story turned out because she actually left. But the question is, where was her heart? Because this text we're reading is not about your behavior, because your behavior always follows your heart. Where are your affections? Where does your life lay? Who is your Lord? We answer that question before we ever walk out the door and talk to anybody else. We have to answer it and ask it for ourselves. That's the whole purpose of Jesus laying this thing. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things I say? Well, I'll show you. This is what happens. Blessing or disaster. Now, there's some variation in there because sometimes when you're following Jesus Christ, really bad things can happen. And sometimes when you're not following Jesus Christ, some really good things happen. Here's the rule. It doesn't matter. Don't be deceived by what you see because it's not going to end the same way. Something else is coming. Something else is at stake in all of these things we're looking at. He's talking to someone about building a house. So, what do you do when you build a house? This is really simple because you know this. I'm not telling you something you don't know. You find a really good piece of property. If you're doing this in Illinois, that's really easy because everything is pretty much flat. So you still need a good foundation, but it's not really that difficult to build. Once you've got everything, you set it up. Now, if you're in North Georgia and you decide to build a house, you need to think about it because there is not a flat piece of ground in sight. And so you're up on the side of this hill. It's a challenge. How do I do this? Well, you figure it out. Because what's the thing about the house? You want it to be firm. You want it to stand. Because if you make a bad decision, it's not going to take that house very long to start falling down. If you make a good decision, that house is going to stay there for a long time. So we are building a house. So what do? You dig deep and you find a foundation. Well, there isn't any other foundation we're talking about this morning. There's only one foundation. There's only one place. There's only one Lord that is trustworthy. There's only one Lord that is true. There's only one Lord that delivers. In fact, there's only one Lord, period, that's going to do exactly what he said. So, there's the choice. And so, in this text, it's really stark. Okay? You're going to find a place to build your house that's firm and doesn't shake, or you're going to find a place to build your house which is inviting disaster. It's like you got up one day and you said, okay, I'm going to go out today and invite myself to destroy myself. I'm going to do something that is going to end in a mess. And I know it's going to end in a mess, so at that point, what should I do? Now, you know, we should just stop and do something else. But we don't. We do the thing that will end in destruction. We do the very opposite of what's here. Because you see, there's only one Lord. There's only one Lord that rules everything. There's only one Lord that is over everyone. There's only one Lord who delivers on what he is actually saying. Now, that doesn't sound like good news. You know why? Because we're used to choices. Isn't there another way I can do this? Isn't there another choice that doesn't demand this much of me? Isn't there some other way where I can just prevaricate a little bit? Where I don't have to choose that strict kind of obedience to one thing? It's black or white. There's not two or three ways to do it. There's one way to do it. He doesn't talk about a guy who we prefer to follow. It talks about someone who is Lord. There is no other way to get it done. There is one path in all of this. And that grates on our last nerve. Because we really don't like it. Because obedience is never pleasant, because our bent is to make other choices and tell the Lord, well, you need to get on board with this. Well, how does that end? But then, you know how it ends. It always ends badly. It always ends with us in trouble. In fact, it always ends exactly the same way, and that's with disaster. Because the Lord, any Lord, is demanding, and he only has one way of looking at things, and that is, you're going to do it my way or the highway. So there we are, we're stuck in all this thing, because it's about standing or falling. It's about recognizing that some things always turn out well and some things always turn out badly. At the end of the story in Genesis 19, remember? Lot's wife obeyed him and she left. But the question is not whether she obeyed him and left. The question becomes, where was her heart? I'm not even sure that Lot's heart was in the entire thing, but he was looking at the outcome and he knew something really bad was going to happen. When she looked back, that was the end of her journey. So the question this morning, in terms of what Jesus is asking us, is something like this. Do we want to be a pillar of salt, or do we want to go somewhere else? And I suggest to you that every day we have the same choice. Because every day the same Lord is calling us to make the same choice. Every day this Lord is reminding us in more than one way that there's one way to get this done. There is one way that this turns out well. There is one way that I am calling you to behave. Now, when we go out to a world that is living in rebellion, well, there's one way, and that is His way. There's one gospel that calls us to the one Lord that tells us there's one good God who will deal with you in a good way. But there's another path in which even this good God will not let you do just anything at all. Not because He's mad at you, but because He has called you and He understands exactly how things in because he's involved with that too. So here we are, life and death, blessing or destruction. There's no other way to look at this because it's always about a Lord. The Lord is someone that has everything on his side. He is the one that's controlling all of this. He's the one that demands. So there's not 2 or 3 different choices. When we decided to go to Evansville this week, I know that when I get in the car, there's only one choice, and that's the way she wants to go, because it's the shortest way. And I don't argue about that anymore because I'm trying to do the right thing for her. And when God calls me to do one thing, he's not having a hissy fit. He's understanding, and I need to understand that when he calls me to do it one way, it's because that's the best way for me. It's the way that glorifies him as the Lord. It's the one way he stands up in my life through the gospel and tells me there's a way to get this done. There's a little piece of scripture over in 1 John. 1 John chapter 2 that we read this morning, because this is a statement about the world that you and I live in, that we deal with every single day. He says something like this: do not love the world. Now, I could tell you about the Greek and everything else that's in there, but I think it's pretty. Do not love them. Do not set your heart on the world you live in. Now, why does he say that? Because you and I live in a world where there are 2 lords. And the one Lord is the God that calls us by the gospel, and the other Lord is the age we live in, which demands our exclusive obedience. There is not a way to get those both done at the same time. We cannot choose one or the other. We cannot decide today to try to please both. In fact, you've got to show me, Virgil, the middle way so that I can hold on to both sides, so that I don't have to choose. Don't love the world or the things that belong to the world. If anyone loves the world, the love for the Father is having a bad time. No, it doesn't say that. It never says that. It says the love of the Father is not in you. Well, no, I still love the Lord and I'm walking in a different path. You don't love the Lord. That's what the text says. Because it's choice. It's commitment to walking a certain path. Now, do I believe in forgiveness? Do we? Yes. Do we believe that there's a consequence for behaving badly? Yes, there always is. And we can be forgiven. But we don't need to look at God and ask for a pass on this, because he tells us that it doesn't exist. Because everything that belongs to the world, I love the language of the lust of the flesh. Number one, does it feel good? In other words, is it pleasant? Is it something that gives us physical pleasure? That's what he's talking about. That is so seductive, because there's something about us that gets into that. Does it make me feel good? Does it make me feel better? Does it make me feel better about myself? Does it give me the kind of pleasure that I can only get in one place? For everything that belongs to the world, the lust of the flesh, the pleasure that it talks about is something that demands exclusion. If it's about pleasure, it's not suggesting itself to us. It is reaching out and demanding our obedience, our compliance to it. And there's something about us that kind of wants to go in that direction. I like cheese. I do. If you put cheese on something, I'll eat it, even if it's something I really don't like. She was trying to get me sold on broccoli when we first met. And there was something about broccoli that, oh, you are kidding. So she put cheese on it. I would eat anything in the universe with cheese on it. Well, the trouble with cheese is it really tastes good. The other trouble with cheese is it's really bad. In a dietary way, if you just eat cheese all the time, you're killing yourself. Yeah, but it really tastes good, but you're killing it. It really tastes, I really enjoy it. It is killing you. Now, if it's a choice between something that tastes good and something that doesn't, I'm going to choose the cheese. If it's something that is giving me life and something that will kill me, I'm conflicted. Only, not really, I'll stop. Because it's the choice between life and death. Does it taste good? Does it feel good? Is it something that makes my life better in the sense of how I feel? The lust of the flesh, well, is it something that looks good? The lust of the eyes. I used to sell cars, and I was not bad at it. Because people would walk in, and that was the whole point. They didn't really need a new car. They wanted a new car. And you know what my job was? Feed the woman. Don't look at their car and tell them what they need. Look at their car or their life and give them what they want. Even if it is bad for them. Satan does not walk into your life and say, I want you to choose something really bad, because that always ends with us saying, I don't think so. He's going to spin something to you that looks questionable, but make it look like it will give you something that nothing else does. You know people that not in 1,000 years would they choose something that looks bad. But you also know people that have seen something that they really want and made horrific choices to get it. This drug really looks like it'll do something good for me. This path, this house, this car looks like they will really do something good for me, and maybe they will, but if you give in to that as a lust, it will kill you in the end, because it never delivers on what it says. It is always lying. It never delivers on that. And then there's actually the pride of life. Because there is one thing that Satan knows we will always choose. Something that makes me look. That pride of life that makes us make decisions that have nothing to do with other people, because in my worst moments, I really don't care. I want what I want. And sometimes I'll persuade you to do what I want you to do. Now, you don't know that I really don't care, but I'll kind of talk to you. And then sometimes we wind up really not agreeing, because the thing there is, I don't really want to convince you. I want you to leave. I want you to leave me alone. I want you to go somewhere else, because I'm competing with you. And my goal at that point is just to get you to walk away. But if I really want it and you won't walk away, you know what the choice is then? I'm going to walk right over you. If it injures you or kills you, it doesn't matter to me, because I want it so badly and I deserve it so badly that I'll do whatever it takes. The pride in one's life. I am more important than you. I deserve to have it. I want you to give it to me. And if you don't give it to me, I will take it. And I don't care what the cost is to you. In fact, at a certain point, I'm not even going to care what the cost is to me. Because I'm not thinking that far ahead. I just know that my pride is demanding this. And those three things that we're looking at are the antithesis of Him being Lord. They're the statement that I am Lord. They are the very statement of Antichrist, because they say, I want it because it pleases me. I want it because it looks good. I want it because it makes me important. And it says, it is not from the Father, it is from the world. Well, Virgil, you're being a little bit stark there. The text doesn't say that it could be of the Father. It said it is not ever from the Father. But just because it feels good, it's not from the Father. And just because it looks good, that doesn't mean it's from the Father. And if it is feeding my pride, it is never from the Father, because the demand of the Christian life is always humility. This kind of lowliness is always looking at God and saying, what do you need? And looking at others and saying, what do y'all need? Verse 17, the world with its lust is passing away. Lot's wife saw what was passing away, and she wanted that more than she wanted life. People don't make those decisions. People make those decisions every day. They make those kinds of stark decisions every day, because they seem to be saying they'll pay off in the end. They will give you what they want. They will know it won't ever do it. It's always the path to death. The one who does God's will remains forever, has this kind of life that they can only receive from Him. So there's this announcement. It says there's a way to do this that is beneficial to God and beneficial to us. Because rebellion is always the choice of wickedness. We see that in the gospel. We see that in the book of Genesis, all the way from chapters 1 to 11. And rebellion always ends in destruction. Well, sometimes it never works out. It doesn't somehow work out. It never works out, because the only way we can avoid that, the only way that God allows us to avoid that, is by choosing at some point to stop behaving that way, to make another choice. The choice of Lot's wife was between death and life. She chose. I want you to stop and think about this for a minute. She did not make a mistake. She did not trip over a rock. She did not turn around by accident. She turned around and looked. So, right there it is. Now, so what is the call for us every single day? Okay, to call Him Lord and do the things He says. To do what the man building the house that he wanted to last did. You stop and you find a foundation. I remember my father would always do this. He would buy these lots, and then he would get these guys out there and he'd say, okay, I want you to build a foundation. Dig as deep as you need to go to get there. And those guys would do it every single time. They'd dig down, they'd find the best place to go, they'd pour that concrete, and then we could go out and build a house because we knew that it would not fall down. Now, if there was an earthquake, yeah. If there was a disaster, yeah, but under ordinary circumstances, that house is not going anywhere. And I just wanted to make sure that I knew what was going on, because a couple of years ago I drove out to where he built some of those houses on Stanford Gap Road, and they're still there because they were built in the correct place. They were built on something that lasts. So that choice is still there. If we choose the gospel, if we choose God's kingdom, no matter what it looks like, it's always going to stand. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be firm. It's always going to be in a world where everything changes every 15 minutes. It is still going to be there. It's always going to be firm. It's always going to be something that is secure. Let me ask you a question. In a world that is always filled with insecure choices, in a world in which the right choice seems to change every 15 minutes, what do people want? Do they want to build something that's going to blow away in the next 10 minutes? Or do they want something that stands? In fact, let's make it annoying with each other. What do we want? You want something that's going to change in the next 15 minutes? Or you want something that's going to stand? Do you want something that's going to stand when everything's pleasant? Well, that's easy to build. Do you want something that's going to stand in a disaster? We live in California. I was talking to a guy one time. I actually drove by where they were building a house. And it was really onerous because they had this foundation that was laid. And by the way, there were I lost the word there, rebar. It wasn't just buried into the concrete. It was driven into the ground so that it would not move. And as they were building the house, they did not have just nails and joints. They had straps everywhere on that house. And when they put the roof on, it was the same thing. It was like overbuilding until you're in an earthquake. Because then, houses all around you are falling. But that house doesn't move. Jesus said, you need to plan for the earthquake because it's coming. It's unavoidable. It's there because wickedness has its own dynamic and its own inertia, and it will move you in that direction, so you better find something to build your house on. And for us, choosing something to build our house on means we always choose Him as Lord. And we ask something like this: can I make this choice and have Jesus still be Lord? In fact, can I make this choice and talk about Him as Lord at all? Can I make this choice? Maybe it's in my sexual life. Can I make that choice and have Him be Lord? In the life of my business, can I make that choice and have Him still be Lord? Can I make choices in which I am the only person I'm trying to please and have Him still be Lord? Can I make choices in life where all I care about is me and have Him still be Lord? Can I make choices in my life that are only based on something that looks good or that seems to be good and have Him still be? Of course, you and I know that the answer is always no. It's not no once or twice. It's no all the time. And people are looking to see a life that is based on something that will not move. Something that will always stand. Something that always has the dynamic of life about it. I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my word, and acts on me. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock, and when the flood came, the river crashed against that house and could not shake it because it was built on the right place and out of the right stuff. So that's the choice we make every day in all of this. God's kingdom rules over everything. So this is what we're going to do. There's another part of that story in Genesis I didn't tell you. And that was that Abraham came out later that day and looked over the plain, and he saw the destruction that was there. What do you think was in Abraham's mind? What? I wonder if he's okay. I wonder how it's going. But there was one thing that was clearly in his mind. Staying here was the best choice God could allow me to make. And as Lot is down there in that small town that he was led to, there was one thing he knew for certain. The choice he made to come there was the most dreadfully bad choice he could have ever made. I think he was thinking about it. So here we are this day, in a world in which everything seems to be up for grabs. Where's a place where we can always stand, that is always firm? Well, the only place to do that is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. To ask Him to mold us and shape us and change us. And so every day we decide to make those choices. We decide to make Him Lord again. Because He's always calling us every day saying, can you do this? And still call me Lord. In fact, call me Lord, and then you will always make a good choice first. You will always be doing the right thing first. You will always be doing the healthy thing first. You will always be doing the safe and meaningful thing first. Let me ask you a question. Now we're done. What's our choice? Because we live in a world in which choice seems to be meaningless until the end. And then people know they've made really dreadfully bad decisions. I think the first thing here is we need to make really good decisions where He's Lord. And then when we encounter those people and they've made really dreadful decisions, we're able to tell them who to go to begin to make better decisions, to begin to do what the man who built the house on the rock. I think at that point, they begin listening. If you're here this morning, and you're not a Christian, we're going to ask you to come and be baptized into Christ. But if we are, I want to ask you this. Are we making good decisions? Are we making decisions that glorify Him in every area of our life? Because if we're skimping on decisions in one part of your life, it's not going to wreck one part of your life. It's going to wreck our entire life. That's our choice this morning. As we stand and as we